the stage, please. Vivek Sharma, Head of ST Micro's India Operations. Venkat Sihadri, MD of Gigacom Semiconductors. Dr. Premchand Sagar, Vice Chairman of the Dayanand Sagar Institutes. And K. Chandrasekhar, CEO of Forus Health. KC. I think this panel discussion is very interesting because it is something that a lot of us dream about. And I'm not talking about dreaming in the last session. Sometimes, lots of people dream because, after a heavy lunch in the last session, you get into a dream state. But entrepreneurship is the dream state. So even if you literally end up dreaming, I'm sure you will dream of entrepreneurship in this session. So before I begin, I just want to know how many people here are in startups or are setting up startups and so on. I see a hand there. I see, oh, quite a few. Okay, that's very interesting. So, and we've got a great panel here. We are covering almost every aspect of what is required for creating a startup ecosystem. We have a veteran in terms of Vivek of ST Micro, a very key player in terms of developing that ecosystem. So you will hear from him about the corporate side of things. We have an entrepreneur, Casey, who has actually created a company in the last 5 years, and we will share his experience. We have Dr. Sagar, who has been working in the educational domain and is looking at creating huge number of startups by nurturing that entire thing and combining education along with the startups. And we have Venkat, who will bring the Silicon Valley perspective because he has worked in Silicon Valley with a lot of startups. So I think a great panel. I will start with Vivek. And Vivek, may I request you to, we are talking about Make in India, we are talking about Dream to Reality. This is really speaking manufacturing 3.0 for the country. So perhaps a bit of a perspective of what was manufacturing 1.0 all about and 2.0 and what really did not work there and why is it such an important thing for us today?
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you for the introduction as well as starting point. So I believe that in this room, most of us are fully aware, but let's remind ourselves. Sometimes it's important to not, let's say, forget about our glorious past. If we go back to 1940s, in fact, seemingly the first electronic device which was done in the country was a Philips radio. It was 1947 or 48 when India was getting independence. And then also at that time we used to have ITI and with the great analog exchange. It was analog but still lots of electronics and many of let's say our colleagues still remember that ITI used to be one of the big customers for exchanges. So 40s, late 40s were like that. In 50s, we saw the advent of Bharat Electronics, radars, defense systems. In 60s, in fact, there were first, I should say, semiconductor devices also getting done in the country. Then 70s saw big growth of analog TV. And we can still recall, I think many of us were present at that time, so many brands. There was ECTVs, Uptron TVs, Teslas, and it was really a rich ecosystem which got developed of the analog one. And then 80s, in fact, we started to have our full-fledged semiconductor fab also. Very small one, but that was the order of the day at that time. It was a Semiconductor Complex Limited. So that half of the century, we were having a good run over there. Then in 1990s, we know that as soon as India got open, and then somehow we took a back seat in this whole electronics game. Now, there are reasons for that. Surely, we were really focusing on the local situation, whereas the situation on electronics or semiconductors later on was fast becoming global. And probably we can learn a lot from that era, that what was the reason that we were in fact ahead of many other countries at that time during that period. Nevertheless, not everything was lost. 90s onwards saw big growth in services, VLSI design, embedded software. 1990, there were around 10 companies. I believe now there are more than 100 companies which are involved in this kind of field. So this was the another period. But now I think we are back to the threshold of giving a huge kickstart to the ESDM industry, which has changed its flavor of what was the case, half a century back. So is coming back with the new one. And here we need to also look into the world, that how world has really capitalized on this. So there, I would say, Pradeep, in my opinion, there are three dimensions which we need to look at this. One is most important, I believe, is the ecosystem. And we have examples of all the countries, either Europe or East or America. Second, interestingly, we also see that there is one thriving application segment. Then there could be multiple others, but there is one key, I should say, driving segment which drives there. And finally, which is a soft aspect, but I would say that the vision is extremely important. So in my capacity as a salesman for my company, I am in touch with many of the electronics companies in India, and that is one dimension I find that is essentially needed for us to be successful at the global scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek, for laying the foundation of what is required for the ecosystem. And I will come back to you on the 3 points that you raised. Moving on to Dr. Sagar, would you like to just share with us what really you are doing at the Anand Sagar Institutes?
Thank you, Pradeep. When we talk of, creating an ecosystem, you look at two angles. One is, do you catch them young? I mean, today the point is, if you look at academia, in especially tier 2 institutions, we don't talk of tier 1. Tier 1 is extremely competent, capable, well nourished, and well supported. But they don't add to a large number into the technical manpower which can actually go across. So, how do we, when we, especially when you have a Make in India dream, and if you want to enlarge the scope of having a large number of people who can not only contribute to the vision and the dream, but also, understand and risk this whole concept is I can do something. And that is where we believe, how can tier 2 institutions leapfrog? When I say tier 2, I look at the point of, the top rung of the tier 2. I'm keeping the IITs and the NITs out of the picture, but you're looking at a large number of technical schools, which have a large number. Now, DSI, the Anand Sagar, for example, manages closer to about 9,000 students in technical education. An university which handles about 18,000 students, but we find challenges. The challenges that we have is not in terms of employability, because all of our students get jobs. They get jobs 1 year earlier. The question that comes in, how do we get across to enable research? We've been able to handle it. The Anand Sagar has been shortlisted along with CDAC and Samir to develop the first indigenous 1.5 Tesla MRI. So there's a significant amount of enabling research. But the one thing that really concerns us is how do we go across to move from job seekers to job enablers? And that's where, if we are able to create an ecosystem. And what the Anand Sagar is attempting to do is creating its Campus 3, which would be a 400,000 square foot physically built infrastructure, which would support entrepreneurship and innovation. Now, the whole thing that comes across is because, constantly we find that academia working completely different from industry. I think the purpose that we are attempting to do across here is to develop an ecosystem and also to catch people very young to see that, can you participate in the Make in India story? Not to create something which is very unique, which will actually be useful to the nation at large. So that's where we are attempting to pitch across, to actually act as an interface or as a service provider or as a provider between, to bridge the gap between the needs of tomorrow and also prepare the young minds to say that, look, you can start dreaming big, you can attempt yourself at entrepreneurship, and we can try to enable to create that great dream.
Some numbers, what sort of number of entrepreneurs every year you want to nurture in
Well, we are looking
this?
down, to enable, it's a 400,000 square feet structure. The phase one of it would be closer to about 50,000 square feet of them would be opened up for creating startups. Now, this would be, when we are going to look at what we are trying to look across, is we're trying to create, embed both, both in terms of the electronics industry as well as the ICT industry. Can we create this, both at the level of the grad student, at the level of the undergrad student, and at scholars, and especially at faculty. And faculty and also people who are there in the industry who can come across, get into the design labs, create the design, go on into the next point where they can validate and test that particular design, get into a startup scenario, and probably look at the whole the ecosystem of the startup. So it would actually go across, the challenge for us that we had was how can a tier 2 institution leapfrog? Tier 2 institutions have always been under the control of central universities, which means you work under a dictated atmosphere. Now, as we become a university, thanks to many initiatives which the government has now taken across, as we become a university, we bring in a greater degree of flexibility. So we believe that there are people in industry who can come across and participate as mentors in the startups. There could be students who could actually get across. And the fear of failure need not risk them, because at the end of the day, they still get across a degree and they will still get across an employment. So how do we bring out the best among the younger folk?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Moving on to Venkat, would you like to share the experience of, you worked with a lot of startups, so, just a background of what you've done and share about the Silicon Valley ecosystem.
Thank you, Pradeep. I've been in the Silicon Valley for the last 25 years. And I was lucky enough to see a nice boom of semiconductor companies, especially in the mid-90s and the late 90s. The fabless model was just picking up. And so there was a wave of semiconductor companies trying to come up with a concept, build their own chips, and go to TSMC and UMCs to get the chips fabricated. So at that time, I had my own startup called